The third day without food is the one that makes you stop feeling hungry and start feeling hollow. That's how I ended up in a cracked vinyl recliner at a plasma center. On the edge of town, knees pressed together, jacket zipped to my chin, fluorescent. Lights overhead buzzing like they resented being awake. The room smelled like disinfectant and burnt coffee. People sat in rows with clipboards and downcast eyes. All of us pretending this was just another errand, just another Tuesday, just another thing normal people did. A nurse tightened the tourniquet around my arm. First time, she asked, voice gentle, like she was offering me a piece of her calm. I nodded. Just need to get through the week. She gave me a sympathetic half smile and swabbed the inside of my elbow. You'll be fine. Little. Pinch. The needle slid in. A dark ribbon of blood traveled through the clear tube, steady and sure. Like my body hadn't received the memo that my entire life was in pieces. The nurse Gilly, according to her name tag, glanced at the monitor, then at the collection line, then back again. Her expression shifted in a way you feel before you understand. What? I asked, keeping my voice level. Probably nothing, she said too quickly. Just hold still for me, okay? She drew a small sample into a vial and walked to the microscope station in the corner. I watched her shoulders tense, watched her lean in, pull back, lean in again like her eyes were arguing with what they saw. When she turned around, all the warmth had drained from her face and mum. She said quietly, and her hands weren't steady anymore. Don't move. My stomach dropped. Is something wrong with me? No. I just please don't move. She hurried out, one hand already reaching for the phone on the wall. Conversations in the room continued around me. Someone laughed at something on their screen. A machine beeped. Life carried on like my chest wasn't tightening by the second. When Keely returned, she wasn't alone. A man in a white coat strode in like the building belonged to him. Tall, sharp-eyed, clipboard tucked under his arm, his badge read doctor. Brennan. He studied the vial, then me, then the line running from my arm to the collection bag as if it had suddenly become priceless. Ms. Hart, he said, measured and careful. I need to confirm a few things. My name's on the form, I said, trying to make it a joke. It came out thin. What's going on? He didn't smile. Your blood type came back unusual. Unusual. The word didn't belong in a plasma center. Unusual belonged in museums and medical journals. Not in my broke, exhausted, dollar-counting life. Is it bad? I asked. It's rare, he corrected. Then, after a beat, exceptionally rare. He pulled a stool closer and lowered his voice, as though he was about to share a secret the room wasn't authorized to hear. You have Rh-null. Blood, he said. Some people call it golden blood. There are fewer than 50 confirmed cases in the entire world. I stared at him, waiting for the punchline. You're kidding. I'm not. My eyes slid to the collection bag, the slow filling of something that had been nothing but survival money 2 minutes ago. What does that mean? I asked. Am I in danger? No, he said. But people who need a match for Rh-null blood are in danger every day, and they almost never find one in time. His phone buzzed sharply. He answered, turning slightly away, speaking in clipped phrases I couldn't follow. Yes, confirmed. 3 runs. Stable donor. We're keeping her here. He ended the call and looked at me with an expression that didn't quite fit a place like this. Something caught between awe and urgency. Ms. Hart, he said, there's a patient in Monaco who may not survive the next few hours without your blood type. I let out a short laugh, not because it was funny, but because my brain couldn't find a safer sound to make. Monaco, I repeated, like I'd misheard. I came here for $50. Dr. Brennan nodded once. I understand, but this isn't a normal donation. My hands began to shake around the armrests, not from fear, exactly more like the ground beneath my life had cracked open again. Except this time, the fissure opened upward instead of down. And the strangest part was this: 6 months earlier, I believed nothing in the world could ever surprise me again. 6 months ago, I was Violet Hart, the woman Kansas City developers called when they wanted something difficult, done quietly and on time. I ran Hart Construction Group. I built it from a rusty pickup, borrowed tools, and a set of blueprints I guarded like scripture. 15 employees, 4 crews. More jobs than we could comfortably handle and the reputation to charge for it. Our trucks rolled through town with VH painted in bold blue on the doors. That logo meant something. It meant deadlines met. It meant impossible demolitions handled without drama. It meant I could walk onto a site in a hard hat. And men twice my age stepped aside without being asked. I didn't come from money. I came from stubbornness. From being told no so many times that I started hearing it as fuel. Then we landed the Bridgepoint Mall project, a $25 million demolition and rebuild contract. The kind of job that doesn't just pay you, it transforms you. New equipment, bigger bids, bigger rooms, a future I could finally see the edges of. My project manager, Gabe Collins, stood in my trailer with the site plans spread out like a promise. Utilities are cleared, he said confidently. Gas, electric, water, everything disconnected. We're clean. I should have verified it myself. I should have been the paranoid CEO who checks everything twice. Instead, I trusted the systems that had never failed me. At 10:14 a.m. on a Thursday, I was marking notes on the blueprints when the world punched back. The ground jolted hard enough to rattle my coffee off the table. A flash white, violent lit the windows, and then a sound that didn't belong on Earth, like the sky tearing open from the inside. The forgotten gas line buried and undocumented. Installed decades ago, when good enough passed for engineering ruptured beneath the old foundation. Flames roared up like something that had been waiting there for years. By sheer luck and timing, no one died. But no fatalities didn't matter once the footage hit the news. The next morning, the headline took a blade to my gut. Hart Construction negligence, millions in damages. The lawsuits arrived like they'd been pre-printed, just waiting for my name. The city, the gas company, private businesses in the surrounding blocks. Everyone wanted someone to blame, and my company's logo was the easiest target. My insurance agent, a man who always wore a suit like he was attending a funeral for other people's problems, slid a stack of documents across his desk. "I'm sorry," he said, already sounding not sorry at all. Clause 1 for B. Independent verification required. You signed off on it. But the blueprints were wrong. I snapped. The line wasn't listed. That's a city error. He shrugged without looking up. Their error doesn't erase your responsibility. Within 2 weeks, contracts froze. Accounts were seized. Equipment lenders called. Banks stopped returning my messages. I went from negotiating 6-figure deals to begging not to have my excavators repossessed. That's when my husband stopped pretending he was in this with me. Evan had loved the idea of me confident, successful, unstoppable. He used to bring coffee to my job sites and watch me talk to foremen like I own the weather. But admiration has a shelf life when it's built on comfort. The night the foreclosure notice arrived, he didn't ask how I was holding up. He didn't ask what the plan was. He stood by the front door with a suitcase already packed. "Evan," I said, and it shocked me how small my voice sounded in my own house. "We can rebuild. I just need time." He didn't meet my eyes. I didn't marry a failure, Violet. I felt the words more than I heard them. "I'm not drowning with you," he said. The door clicked shut. The quiet afterward was heavier than any steel beam I'd ever ordered. I sank to the floor between piles of invoices and legal letters, staring at the walls I used to be proud of, realizing an empire can collapse without warning. And the people who benefited most from it can vanish the moment it stops paying them. The morning after Evan left, the house smelled like burnt coffee that had sat too long on the warmer. His toothbrush was gone. His closet was empty. On the top shelf, one of my old hard hats sat there like a taunt, something that used to mean power. Now just plastic and dust. On the fridge, the notice screamed in red. Foreclosure pending. My sister Dana called that afternoon. VI, she said softly, like she'd already seen the worst coming. You can't stay there alone. Come stay with us. I'm fine, I lied, because pride is a reflex. You don't sound fine. You sound scraped out. By evening, I was driving 3 hours west in my old Ford, the same truck that once carried blueprints and ambition. Now it carried boxes labeled kitchen, tools, papers, like I was packing up someone else's failed life. Dana's house smelled like fresh paint and laundry detergent, and a stability I used to mistake for small thinking. She and her husband Rick were kind, but kindness has edges when bills are involved. They cleared a space in the basement, concrete floor, a small window near the ceiling, a fold-out cot that complained every time I moved. Dana hugged me tight. It's temporary. You'll bounce back. Temporary turned into weeks. I applied for everything: assistant project manager roles, foreman positions, clerical jobs. I rewrote my resume until it looked like someone less threatening. Every interview ended the same way, with different words. You're overqualified. We're looking for someone younger. We'd rather avoid the attention. Attention. As if I were a scandal, not a person. At night, I lay on that cot listening to Dana's kids laugh upstairs. The sound of their normal life muffled through the floorboards while mine stayed frozen on pause. The washing machine became my midnight soundtrack. The furnace kicking on and off felt like the house sighing at my presence. Once, I overheard Rick's voice through the vents. She's trying, he said, but we can't carry this forever. Dana murmured something back, softer, protective. I rolled onto my side and stared into the dark, swallowing humiliation like it was a meal I had to finish. By January, my checking account read $47.80. I sold my last gold bracelet for gas. I rationed groceries like I was preparing for a siege. I stopped buying anything that wasn't essential. And then I redefined essential until it barely meant alive. One night, I opened my phone and typed Evan's name. I'm sorry. Can we talk? My thumb hovered over send. Then I deleted it. He didn't get to leave and still have access to my voice. I stepped outside into the winter wind, looked up at a sky crowded with stars too far away to care, and whispered the only thing I had left. God, I made something out of nothing once. I can do it again, right? The silence that answered felt colder than the air. The next morning, walking toward the library for free Wi-Fi and job listings, I saw a sign across the street glowing like a lifeline. BioLife Plasma Center new donors $50. $50. Pathetic. Critical. Enough for groceries. Enough to buy time. Enough to keep pretending I wasn't becoming a permanent burden in my sister's basement. So I walked in, and now I was here, with a needle in my arm, a bag filling beside me, and a doctor telling me my blood belonged in a category reserved for medical miracles. I don't understand, I said to Dr. Brennan, my voice rough. What happens now? We'll run confirmation tests, and he stopped when his phone buzzed again. He answered immediately. Yes, she's here. We're not letting her leave. He hung up, jaw tight. They've already mobilized, he murmured, more to himself than to me. Who has? I asked. He studied me carefully, like he was deciding how much truth a person could carry at once. The Marrow family, he said. Their patriarch Henry Marrow has a rare blood disorder. He's bleeding internally. Without compatible blood, the surgery can't proceed. My throat constricted. You're saying my blood could keep him alive? He nodded once. Yes. The room felt smaller. The air felt thinner. A few hours ago, I'd been calculating how to stretch $20 across a week. Now strangers across an ocean were calling this building, asking about me like I was cargo that needed securing. The door opened again. Keeley stepped inside, cheeks flushed, eyes wide. Dr. Brennan. There's someone here asking for Miss Hart. Doctor. Brennan straightened his coat like the moment required formality. Send her in. The woman who entered didn't belong in this place of buzzing lights and tired faces. She wore a tailored gray suit that had never known a bargain rack. Her posture was flawless. Her gaze locked onto me as if she'd memorized my face from a photograph. Ms. Hart, she said, extending a hand. Her voice was polished, controlled. I'm Lucia Corvell, representative of the Merrow family. Her handshake was firm, but not warm, transactional. One of our own is dying, she said, and we've searched the world for a donor. She paused, eyes flicking briefly to the tube running from my arm. Now that we've found you, we intend to move quickly. You're the only confirmed match, Lucia said. For a moment, I didn't hear anything else, the hum of machines, the muffled television in the waiting area, even my own pulse. All of it dropped way behind that sentence. I stared at her like she'd spoken a different language. What exactly are you asking me to do? To come with us? She replied, as if she were inviting me to a business lunch instead of rewriting my entire existence. Our jet is fueled. If we leave within the hour, we can have you in Monaco in under 12. Dr. Brennan's eyes met mine. He wasn't pushing, just letting me understand the shape of the moment. They're offering compensation, he said carefully. Significant compensation. I swallowed. How significant? Lucia hesitated, the first crack in her polished composure. Then she said it anyway. $2 million. Even the monitor beside me seemed to pause. $2 million for my blood. My voice came out, like air leaking from a tire. For life, Lucia corrected. Calm again. Your blood makes surgery possible. Without it, Henry Merrow won't survive the night. I looked down at my arm. Wear tape held the line in place, and a purple bruise was already blooming under my skin. A few hours ago, that arm had been good for one thing, earning $50 for groceries. Now it carried a price tag that could erase every foreclosure notice and lawsuit-shaped nightmare I'd been drowning in. But the question that rose in me wasn't about money. Why me? I asked. Lucia's gaze tightened like she'd been trained to guard secrets and had just reached the edge of one she couldn't fully hide. Because, Ms. Hart, she said quietly, this isn't chance. It's heritage. The word hit harder than the offer.heritage. Dr. Brennan and Lucia exchanged a look, to professionals silently negotiating how much truth you're allowed to drop on someone still connected to a machine. Dr. Brennan exhaled slowly. When our lab flagged Rh-null, our system ran an extended genetic panel. For donors this rare, we check for specific markers. It's standard protocol. And I asked, throat dry. He turned his tablet toward me. Graphs and percentages filled the screen, the kind of data that looks like nonsense, until someone tells you it's your entire identity. These markers, he said, tapping the display, appear consistently in one documented bloodline. European, specifically tied to the Merrow family of Monaco. I let out a small, disbelieving sound. You're telling me I'm related to a billionaire dynasty? You grew up in Wichita, Lucia said, studying me. Yes. That doesn't contradict anything. It should, I snapped. My mother waited tables. My father drove trucks. We didn't have bloodlines. We had overdue bills and secondhand furniture. Lucia stepped closer. Your mother's name. I blinked. Rachel Whitmore. And the man who raised you? Tom Hart. Lucia's expression shifted, recognition mixed with something colder, like a puzzle piece clicking into place. Rachel Whitmore, she repeated, almost to herself. We have records of an American woman named Rachel Whitmore employed by the Merrow family in the early 1980s. Translator, administrative work. That's impossible, I said, shaking my head. My mother never left the country. Lucia didn't argue. She simply continued, as if the facts didn't need my permission to exist. Henry Merrow had a younger brother named Vincent. He disappeared in 1985 after a dispute with Henry. That same year, Rachel Whitmore left Monaco without notice. The air thinned in my lungs. I looked at Dr. Brennan. Are you saying my dad isn't my dad? His voice softened. I'm saying your DNA matches the Marrow family signature at 99.7%. That level of match isn't coincidence. Ms. Hart, it's lineage. My thoughts scattered my childhood, my parents. Every story I'd ever been told about who I was suddenly looked like a house built on a foundation. Someone had quietly moved without telling me. I reached for my phone with trembling fingers. I need to call my father. Dr. Brennan nodded. Do it. But time matters. He stepped out, leaving Lucia watching me the way an attorney watches a witness patient. Alert. Ready to redirect if needed. I hit the contact labeled Dad. It rang twice. VI. Tom Hart's voice came through familiar, gravelly, steady. The only steady thing I'd had lately. I almost couldn't speak. Dad, did Mom ever work overseas? Silence. Not the confused silence of someone searching their memory. The heavy silence of someone deciding whether to keep protecting you. Then a slow breath. Where are you right now? My throat tightened. Answer me. Another breath longer this time. Yes, he said quietly. She did. My stomach dropped through the floor. So it's true. Tom didn't rush. He never did. That was his gift. He made panic feel embarrassed to exist. Your mother met a man over there. He said, Vincent Marrow. She came home pregnant. I pressed a fist to my mouth, trying not to make a sound. I married her anyway. Tom continued. She asked me to give you a normal life and keep that world away from you. So I did. You lied. I whispered, and it didn't sound like anger so much as grief. I raised you. He said. That part was never a lie. Tears blurred the room. I turned my face slightly so Lucia wouldn't see them fall. Dad, I managed. Henry Marrow is dying. They're saying my blood can save him. Tom's answer came instantly. Like he'd been waiting his whole life for the moment I might need permission to be brave. Then you go, he said. You do what you know is right. But no buts, Violet. His voice cracked just enough for me to hear the love underneath. Don't hate your mother. She wasn't running from you. She was running for you. I closed my eyes. Okay. When I opened them, Lucia was still there, composed, unreadable. I'll go, I said, voice steadier than I felt. But not for the money. A faint curve touched her lips. Of course. Then, like she couldn't help herself, she added softly, but it will repair certain practical problems in your life. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Not yet. 10 minutes later, I was in the back of a black sedan with windows so dark the city outside looked like a film set. Lucia's phone never stopped buzzing. The driver didn't speak. He didn't need to. This whole operation moved like a machine that had been warming up for years. When we reached the private airstrip, a white jet sat under floodlights, sleek and silent, with a medical team already boarding Dot at the bottom of the stairs. I stopped and gripped the rail. 6 hours ago, I'd been calculating how to survive on $47. Now I was flying across the world to save a man I'd never met who might be. Family stepping into a story my mother had buried so deep she'd taken it to her. Grave. Lucia appeared beside me. You can still refuse, she said, not unkindly. But if you do, he dies. It wasn't a threat. It was arithmetic. I climbed the steps. Inside, the cabin smelled like leather and recycled air. A flight nurse checked my vitals. A doctor explained consent forms and risks in a tone that assumed people like me did this sort of thing routinely. Silver medical cases sat strapped into seats, each stamped with a small cresta stylized M that looked like a crown without the arrogance. I settled into a chair or two, expensive for my thrift store jacket, and stared out the oval window as the jet lifted into the night. Lucia sat across from me, typing messages in French, occasionally glancing up as if to confirm I hadn't vanished. After a long stretch of silence, she asked, "Are you afraid of flying, Ms. Hart?" I almost laughed. I'm afraid of landing. Landing where? In the truth, I said, and finding out I don't recognize myself anymore. Lucia's expression softened by a fraction. Truth is heavier than altitude, but it's also cleaner. I stared at my phone. My thumb hovered over Tom Hart's name, my real father, in every way that counted. But there was another name Lucia had written on a card, like an address to a life I never knew existed. Vincent Merrow. A direct number. A private line. I hit call before I could change my mind. It rang once. Twice. Then a man answered. Voice low and weary, as if he'd been waiting for a call he didn't deserve. Violet? My spine went rigid. You're Vincent. A pause. Not denial. Acceptance. Yes, he said. I am. My grip tightened on the phone. Why didn't you tell me? Why let me grow up believing I was nothing but Kansas and hard work and unpaid bills? Because I wanted you free, he said, and the words sounded carved from decades of regret. Henry and I were raised in a gilded trap. Every friendship was an arrangement. Every decision had a committee. When I met your mother, it was the first time my life felt real. So you ran. I left. He corrected quietly. There's a difference. I swallowed hard. Henry is bleeding internally. They're telling me I'm the only match. I know, Vincent said. His voice roughened. Lucia would have told them the moment your blood was confirmed. You're not coming, I asked, anger sparking beneath my exhaustion. I can't, he said. Not yet. Not like that. But you can. I stared at the dark window, my reflection floating over clouds like a ghost who hadn't decided whether to haunt or move on. What happened between you and Henry? I asked, a breath. He wanted me to become the future of the family. He thought love meant duty. I thought love meant choice. And you chose my mother. Yes. My voice cracked. He's dying, Vincent. I know, he whispered. So you save him. And if he wakes up, tell him I stopped being angry a long time ago. I closed my eyes, tears finally spilling. Tom Hart raised me. He's the one who showed up every single day. I'm grateful for that, Vincent said. And Violet listened to me. Blood connects people. It doesn't define them. Your life is yours because you built it. I wiped my face with my jacket sleeve. Okay, the call ended. But his last sentence stayed in the cabin like an echo stronger than the engines. Lucia watched me quietly. He told you, she said. I nodded. He did, for the first time. She looked less like a negotiator and more like a person carrying a complicated burden of her own. Vincent was the only Merrow who ever walked away from power, she said. Henry admired that more than he ever admitted. Outside the window, dawn began thinning the darkness, and far below, the Mediterranean appeared deep blue stitched with threads of early sunlight. Monaco looked unreal from above. Coastline ranged like jewelry. Yachts scattered like floating mansions. Buildings packed together as if the city were afraid to waste a single inch. A black car met us on the tarmac. Another silent driver. Another set of gates opening without anyone asking who I was. Because Lucia's presence answered for me. The hospital wasn't a hospital the way I understood hospitals. It felt like a palace that happened to contain medicine marble floors. Crystal chandeliers, artwork on the walls worth more than my entire old neighborhood. I became suddenly aware of my cheap shoes. My exhausted face, the faint tape mark still visible on my arm. From the plasma center chair, Lucia guided me through secured corridors into a private suite, guarded by men who didn't wear uniforms but carried themselves like weapons. Inside, machines beeped in steady rhythm. A man lay in the bed frail, pale, silver-haired, but when his eyes opened and found mine, my chest tightened, because his eyes looked like mine. Henry, Lucia said gently, "This is Violet Hart." Henry's gaze held me with surprising intensity for someone who looked like he might dissolve into the sheets at any moment. "You look like Rachel," he whispered. My throat burned. People keep telling me that. His lips trembled not with fear, but with something else. recognition, loss, relief tangled together. Vincent's daughter, he said, as if speaking it aloud made it real enough to survive. Yes, I answered, voice shaking. And I'm here. A weak smile touched his mouth. Then perhaps you're saving more than just my body. Doctors moved quickly, consent forms, vitals. Sterile preparation. A physician explained the process with clinical efficiency, trying to keep emotion out of it. But even she treated my blood like fragile gold. When the transfusion line was ready, a nurse met my eyes. Last chance to change your mind, she said softly. I looked at Henry, then at my arm, then at Lucia, who stood back like a shadow holding a passport. I shook my head. Do it. The needle slid in, clean and sharp dot, and then I felt it the slow, rhythmic pull as my blood began moving away from me and toward him. Henry reached out with a thin, trembling hand and closed his fingers round mine. His grip was surprisingly warm. You have no idea, he murmured, voice raw, what it means to see you here. Tears ran down my cheeks without permission. Maybe I do, I whispered, because a week ago, I didn't know who I was anymore. And now I'm sitting here watching my body keep someone alive. His eyes closed briefly, like the relief was too heavy to hold while awake. Welcome, he breathed, to the part of your story they kept from you. Morning arrived bright. Sunlight pouring through tall windows overlooking a sea too beautiful to trust. I was still in the chair beside Henry's bed. My arm ached. My head felt light, but not in a dizzy way. More like something inside me had finally unclenched. Henry stirred and opened his eyes. You stayed, he said, voice noticeably stronger than the night before. I wanted to see you wake up, I replied. It felt important. He gave a faint chuckle. You have our mother's stubborn kindness. Vincent always said she was too gentle for our world. At the mention of Vincent, the air between us changed. He's alive, I said quietly. He asked me to tell you he forgave you a long time ago. Henry turned his face toward the window, blinking rapidly. Forgave me, he repeated, like the word didn't fit his mouth anymore. No, I'm the one who should ask forgiveness. I tried to force him into a life he didn't want because I thought that was love. It wasn't. It was control dressed up as duty. He looked back at me. He chose freedom. He chose your mother, and he gave the world you. I didn't have a perfect answer to that. So I did the only thing that felt honest. I reached for his hand and held it. That afternoon, a woman entered the suite with the kind of composure only wealth or rigorous training can produce. She was elegant but not cold, beautiful but not fragile. Her eyes scanned me the way you assess someone who might become permanent in your life. Violet, she said, offering her hand. I'm Isabel Marrow, his daughter. I guess. She nodded. And I owe you my father's life. You don't owe me anything, I said. He does. He should go live it. Isabel's mouth tightened into something like reluctant gratitude. She slid a sealed folder across the table. The transfer has been completed. $2 million, as agreed. I stared at it like it might bite. It feels wrong to accept this. Then use it in a way that isn't wrong, she said simply. People like us have the luxury of pretending money is never the point. People like you don't. But you can decide what it becomes. Her gaze dropped briefly to my hands work-scarred. Calloused, stubborn hands that had built a company once. My father says you build things. She added, maybe that's the part of our bloodline worth inheriting. Her words landed deeper than she could have known. That evening, Henry asked for me again. Color had returned to his face, not fully, but enough to make him look like a man instead of a fading photograph. He gestured to a small velvet box on the bedside table. Open it, he said. Inside lay a gold pendant shaped like a single droplet symbol. Elegant, heavy enough to feel real in my palm. It belonged to our mother, he said. She believed the Marrow's greatest gift was never our wealth. It was our ability to sustain others when no one else could. I can't accept this, I said automatically. Henry smiled gentle, almost amused. You already have. The moment you walked through that door. I closed the box slowly, my throat tight. I don't know what I am yet. You don't have to, he said. Just don't let anyone else decide it for you ever again. Later, outside the hospital, Monaco smelled like salt and jasmine. Expensive perfume carried on ocean air. The harbor glittered with yachts under moonlight floating worlds that still didn't feel like mine. Lucia met me by the car. Everything is ranged, she said. Henry wishes you to know the family formally recognizes you. I looked out at the water, the pendant box warm in my hand. That's kind, I said carefully. But I already have a family. Lucia tilted her head. And now you have more. Maybe, I answered. Or maybe I just finally know what was inside me all along. As we drove away, the city lights blurred past like a dream I wasn't sure I wanted to wake from. Kansas looked different when I came home, not smaller in a cruel way, just more honest. The cold wind still cut through coats. The roads still needed patching. People still waved at stop signs like you mattered even when you didn't know them. But I wasn't the woman who had walked into that plasma center. I wasn't only Violet Hart, the construction CEO who crashed and burned. And I wasn't some Monaco heiress in disguise either. I was both stories stitched together, and somehow that made me steadier. Not split. Tom Hart met me at the diner off Highway 24. The same one my mother used to talk about like it was a universe unto itself. He was already seated in our old booth. 2 coffees waiting. His hands wrapped around his mug like it was something to anchor himself to. You went, he said as I slid in across from him. I did. I whispered. Henry lived. Tom's eyes shimmered, and he blinked hard like he didn't want to waste tears on something that deserved them. And Vincent? He asked carefully. He told me to tell Henry he'd forgiven him years ago, I said. And Henry heard it. He felt it. Tom reached across the table and covered my hand with his. That familiar weight. That chosen love. Your mother would have been proud, he said, voice thick with emotion. You brought peace back into something we spent decades trying to outrun. I nodded, swallowing hard. You're my dad, I said, letting the words land exactly where they belonged. He squeezed my hand once. I know. 2 weeks later, I did the thing I understood best. I built again. Not skyscrapers. Not glossy vanity projects for developers who'd forget my name the moment the ribbon was cut. I reopened my business differently, smaller, leaner, more intentional, and I put the money somewhere it couldn't rot into ego. We focused on rebuilding homes destroyed by fires, storms, and the kind of bad luck that never makes headlines until it happens to you. We partnered with local churches, trade unions, anyone willing to show up with a hammer and a willing heart. I hired back crew members who'd stayed loyal until the lawsuits strangled us. I didn't call it Hart Construction Group anymore. I called it Foundation Works because that's what I was doing, literally and otherwise. Laying groundwork, building from what remained. Sometimes, when I watched my crew pour a new slab for a family who'd lost everything, I'd think about that day under the buzzing fluorescent lights. How I'd walked in ashamed, ready to sell pieces of myself for grocery money. And how, in one brutal twist, the thing I'd been willing to trade away turned out to be the thing. That connected me to a truth larger than my ruin. At night, on my porch, I'd hold the gold pendant between my fingers and let it catch the last of the fading light. I thought about Henry's hand closing around mine in that hospital room, about Vincent's voice on the phone, telling me blood wasn't destiny. About Tom Hart, who stayed every single day when he didn't have to. And about my mother, who kept the secret not because she wanted me small, but because she wanted me safe. I used to believe the rarest thing in the world was success. Now I understood better. The rarest thing is being revealed fully, painfully, honestly, and surviving it whole. I once walked into a plasma center hoping for $50. I walked out carrying a second history, a second family, and a second chance I never saw coming. And the miracle wasn't that my blood was rare. The miracle was that when the world finally demanded something from me, I gave it freely and discovered myself in the giving.